the latest release of China's economic data for 2018, it seems China's economy has been having a bumpy ride. Rising protectionism and a stagnant world economy, coupled with the domestic challenges, have caused a slowdown in economic growth. Going into 2019, with the unsettled nature of today's international environment, the Chinese economic situation is being put to the test. With growth slowing, what can be said about China's structural economic ailments? What practical plans can best address these issues? And how are external factors influencing policymakers and their plans for the economy? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Zhang Gong, University of International Business and Economics, and Professor Carl Fei from Aalto University School of Business, Finland. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Carl, welcome, and John, welcome to a dialogue here. First of all, a tough question about the accuracy of the statistics. Do you really trust that we enjoyed a steady growth, though a modest slowdown from 6.8 last year to current 6.6?
I think it's, probably a little bit of uncertainty in the figures, as is often the case in China, but the sort of general trend, I think, we can expect, and I don't think there's radical inaccuracies.
I think GDP calculation is always not perfect. There's always sectors, part of the economy that hasn't been covered by this calculation. But it really doesn't matter too much, in my opinion, because we're really capturing the growth, which is the the difference compared to this period with last period. And if there's underestimation in the last period or overestimation in the last period, there's going to be the same thing happening in this period as well. So I think overall we should give some face to the statistics. I mean, the China's Statistics Bureau is very extensive. They have a lot of people collecting data in the fields, and we should give them credit as well as give them benefit of doubt that they're doing a good job, I guess.
By the time we went on the air, President Xi Jinping was hosting a meeting, a very important meeting on economy. He was talking to leaders at the ministerial level, including governors from different provinces and autonomous regions, focusing on two major issues. One is, of course, the economic performance, the other, political stability. Of course, there is a close relevance between the two things. So what do you think of the domestic challenges? Later on, we'll talk about external threats. First of all, what do you think are the most important domestic challenges?
Well, I think a couple things that China's been trying to put some effort on is trying not just to have a focus on the magnitude, the amount of growth, but how they're achieving that growth. So, for example, a move to being more innovative, having more produced in China with the China 2025 strategy. I think China has made pretty good progress in this, compared to what one might have predicted a couple years ago. So I'm rather happy to see that. China's also made a big move to try to move more towards the service sector, and this has been happening as well, with service sector growth going higher in the last year compared to other sectors of the economy. So I think that some of the slowdown can be attributed, of course, to the trade conflict with the U.S., other factors internal to China. But I think also some of it can be accredited to trying to make some changes now and adjustments now that are going to benefit China in the long term.
What do you think of the issue of unemployment as well as lack of confidence? In other words, it's an issue of uncertainty concerning the prospects of the Chinese economy. Therefore, investors would give a second thought about whether they should sustain the investment in the high-tech area. And what do you think of the downward economic pressure domestically? Yeah,
well, let's first talk about unemployment. It's about 5% right now, a little bit short of 5%. I think it's still quite manageable. There's some debate about whether, in this morning's press conference, for example, I think the journalist from Bloomberg questioned whether the unemployment figure is reflective of the real situation, maybe an estimate or something like that. But I think overall, the unemployment rate itself is reflective of the overall economic performance as well as market expectations. Companies hire and lay off people based on expectations. The problem with, in my opinion, I think the biggest problem is that we have had a good time for such a long time. This has been 10 years into our boom cycle, and the business cycles tend to have its own life. And after so many years, it's about time that the bad time is going to come. So people are all prepared for this. And the expectation is not tuned to a growth in the future. So that's, I think, the biggest problem.
But I think you're only talking about the cyclical challenges. What about the structural ones?
Absolutely. There are structural problems. As you said, we're trying to upgrade our industry. We're trying to innovate and invest in those high-tech industries. But at the same time, we also closing down factories, closing down steel mills, try to address overcapacity issues, closing down factories because of environmental pollution problems. All these things will have implications for unemployment. So, I think we are faced with a problem here. On one side, we try to gear our economy towards a better future. But on the other hand, we have still a very heavy baggage on our back that's still reflective of the old economy, of manufacturing-based, pollution-intensive industries. And
Carr immediately went to the U.S.-China trade dispute, but one major driving force behind the escalation of the trade disputes between Washington and Beijing, I'm afraid, should be attributed to the relationship between the government and the market. Taking 2025 as an example, the United States is firmly opposed to the Chinese government's industrial policy, our official input into that kind of a competition, which the United States says is unfair. What do you think of the core issue regarding particularly the relationship between the government and the market?
Well, I think that naturally the government tries to respond some to the market. It is true that the U.S. government does feel that China is supporting particularly its state-owned companies more than is optimal. But I think it's also important to take a little bit of a balanced look at this. Countries all around the world do support their companies to various degrees.
Right.
And China now, while they might be supporting somewhat more than other countries, the support they're giving in general is pushing their companies to transform the ways that actually would help them to upgrade and be more effective.
The Chinese government has been indeed very supportive of green technology development, such as, energy, right?
Yeah.
The solar panel. That's why the United States launched anti-dumping, anti-subsidy investigations against the export of solar panels. But what about the R&D input by Mr. Ren Zhengfei of Huawei? I mean, $20 billion US dollars would be put into the R&D this year around without exception.
Yeah, I want to spend some time to talk about Huawei as a special example. I actually wrote up a op-ed article today. I just submitted to CGTN. It's probably forthcoming today or either tomorrow. It is a very unfair case. This company has been spectacularly successful in the past 20-some years ago. Along that road to its success, it was being littered with skulls and bones of its former competitors. Many companies are bankrupt. Northern Telecom, Lucent.
Ericsson.
Actually, Ericsson is still there, but Lucent is already gone. So many companies have gone. So I think what the United States government is trying to do is to, what they lost, what they can't compete on the free market, they're coming up with means to try to destroy this company. And this is totally unfair, in my opinion. I'll give you some examples. When the news came out that this Huawei employee who was detained in Poland, right, for his moonlighting activities in cooperation with a Russian agent. It says it's a Huawei spy case. Now it turns out the other guy is working for Orange. Nobody mentioned it's an Orange spy case, right? So this is totally unfair, in my opinion. Okay, there are other cases, examples like this. So I think the Huawei case is a real special example of how this U.S. government is trying to help U.S. competitors using very unusual means.
If I can just
the reason of national security. I mean, even the Canadian government was accused of
let me give you another example.
Security.
Another example of this. Mr. Ren Zhengfei used to be serving in the U.S. in the China military. This was the cause for claiming that Huawei is somehow connected to the Chinese government. But look at, I know there's 15 U.S. company CEOs in the Fortune 500 companies that are used to be in the U.S. military. FedEx CEO. I mean, think about FedEx. There are millions of packages going through its network, just like bytes going through its network. This guy used to be serving the U.S. Marine Corps. Is there any no doubt? I mean, is there any no speculation about FedEx being engaged in espionage, right?
I actually am very much in alignment with the view here. I think that we should separate two things a little bit. One is, if the Chinese government, on average, is helping companies perhaps too much. And second is the case of Huawei. And I'm actually a little bit puzzled by the U.S. actions towards Huawei because actually I think if there's anything that you would want to encourage, it's companies like Huawei. Huawei has gone through a huge transformation. By the way, part of this transformation has been done with the help of a lot of U.S. consulting companies like IBM Consulting. Secondly, if you think about the case in Poland that you talked about with the supposed spy, one of the things that Huawei, in response more or less to this, did was said that they're going to develop a lab in Germany where all the different regulators can go and look at the source code and look at everything and see if there really are big problems going on. There is always, of course, a little bit of uncertainty if you have a foreign product produced by a foreign country that is, contributing.
Particularly for telecommunication.
Absolutely. However, the question is, how can you decrease the sort of uncertainty the most? And perhaps a little more checking, a little more regulating, a little more cooperation on things like this laboratory would probably go a lot further than trying to crowd Huawei out of the market, for example. Other companies, including American companies, have employees that are not American. I'm not really convinced that there is such a higher threat in the case of Huawei.
Verizon Wireless CEO used to be serving in the U.S. Navy, okay? Verizon Wireless has the U.S. largest network. It also has running networks in India, in Estonia, in Bulgaria, in a couple of other countries. Is there any doubt about, Verizon Wireless being engaged in espionage? This is totally crazy.
And I guess the last point to make that's important is, let's suppose that some real credible evidence came to show that Huawei actually was spying for the Chinese government. I mean, this would be the end of international sales very, very quickly. And so they have to be concerned about this.
Mr. Lindsley said, I would rather have this company go busted than allowing a Chinese government intelligence officials to get their hands onto my network. That's what he said, okay? So, what else can they do? I'm really puzzled as to what else can they do.
Is that actually domestic politics in the United States, given the loss of a House and Democrats descending on President Trump, citing his tax record as an example to illustrate the embarrassment of this presidency? So do you think this is a bipartisan wrangling across the aisle and China falls victim to the domestic politics? China is the only issue that may align Republicans with the Democrats in their crusade against what they call vilified, the villain.
So there probably is something contributing to this, like you say. But I think it also is probably driven a bit by Trump's personal views as well.
Do you think, well, John, China does have its own problems, right? We've been talking about things that may have vilified China, but what about our own shortcomings and vulnerabilities?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, this is a country that has problems and shortcomings. There's no doubt about it. But I think the way it's treated has to be in a fair way, right? It has to be using the same standard, not a double standards, as other
What about the
companies,
issue of SOE? Because for the whole year of 2018, we saw so many debates on the social media, raging debates about the roles of SOE, and will we have any future for the private economy?
The state agency that is supervising the SOEs, the central government control SOEs, just put up a report several days ago announcing their financial results for last year. It was spectacular, very good results, okay? Now, this is against the background that economy is slowing down. Of course, there's some concern about the performance of SOEs, why are they so profitable, while everywhere else is not doing so well. That's an issue here, right? I totally agree. But the thing is that the U.S. government is not so much against, I think, against industrial policy per se, but against the idea that industrial policy is applied in a way that it's helping mostly state-owned enterprises. That I agree. I think we have to have a level playing field here in China, that all players
then what would be the therapy? Loans, equal access to loans?
The first therapy would be reforming the banking system such that loans are equally accessible to state-owned enterprises and to private enterprises. If you ask what is one of the big pains in China, that's
what are the conditions for the loans? And now bankers in China, people in the state-owned banks say to representatives of the SME, why should I provide you with the loans? And the people from the SME say, I have a good idea for a startup company. But do you have assets? That will be the next question from the state-owned banks. the SME said, no, I don't have assets, but I have good ideas. Do you think you're going to run high risk for providing loans?
So I think that no one would suggest...
This has a lot to do with the innovation and the startup companies.
Absolutely. And I don't think anyone would suggest that a company that does not have significant assets and a significant track record should get the same lending rate as a company that has a long history and very large. But it should still be possible for them to borrow money rather than sort of in a gray market. It also should be possible, reasonably equally possible, for a private company that has a long history and a good size and a good balance sheet, and a public company looking similarly, to borrow at similar rates. And in reality, I don't think that's always the case in China.
You know, on this issue, at the OECD, there's this concept called competitive neutrality. It's a concept invented in Australia and it's being promoted by OECD these days. This is a set of principles that apply to the treatment of SOEs as opposed to other companies.
It's a major concept that was borrowed by Yi Gang, top banker.
He said that China's going to willing to...
competitive neutrality.
That's right. Yi Gang said that China is willing to. This is the first time a Chinese government official openly admitted that China is willing to entertain the idea of competitive neutrality. You know, the concept of the phenomenon of SOE is not just unique here in China. You know, in some Scandinavian countries, the sector of SOE is actually even larger than in China in some countries, right? And as long as these companies are being treated in a fair way, quote, you know, according to the competitive neutrality principles, I don't see there's a fundamental conflict here. I don't see there's a component of ideological difference here.
I'm afraid there is a fundamental conflict between the United States and China regarding ideology. The United States insists that China be regarded as an autocracy, not a dictatorship. So the attention and the importance of the central government attaches to SOE is unfair from their perspective. Do you think this is fundamentally a return to a new Cold War? There are a lot of ideological implications here.
Well,
therefore, they adopt, I mean, the Americans may have adopted an ideological lens in examining things in China in black and white terms.
So I think that the current presidency in the U.S. does indeed look very often to black and white things. I would like to point out, being an American, that may not be what every American and every person in different political parties are thinking, and I have to confess that I'm more on the Democratic side of things in the U.S. But at least at the moment, in terms of the government, I think your assessment is right. One other thing I'd like to point out for viewers who might not be so ingrained in Chinese reality, I do a lot of work in Russia also, and Russia also has SOEs. There's a big difference between Russian SOEs on average and Chinese SOEs, and that is that the Chinese SOEs are on average much better managed, much more efficient, much closer to a private company. And so I think part of the problem when you talk about this idealistic debate is a lot of people in the US, in other countries around the world, when they hear the word SOE, they don't really understand this, what I would call sort of hybrid SOE that is what often is existing in China.
Are you talking about the PPP, public-private property, the mixed ownership? That's what you call the hybrid
so that's one
SOE.
thing, but I also, when I say hybrid SOE, I simply mean that a lot of even 100% state-owned companies in China are very progressive and really trying to be fairly profit-oriented, even if they also have some other goals as well.
The thing is that the many SOEs in China, both controlled by central government as well as controlled by provincial and municipal government levels, they are competing in highly competitive fields. For example, automobile industry, the steel industry.
Car sales went down for the first time.
Right, this year's not good yet. And I'll give you another example. In the air conditioning business, you would imagine that in air conditioning is a highly competitive field, right? The best performer in this field, as we all know, is SOE, controlled by the Canton government, who has this company is a very attractive woman CEO, Mr. Dong Mingzhu, yeah. Green air conditioning is an SOE company. It competes in China, it competes internationally, right?
And above all, it's an important part of the real economy, which we cannot afford to ignore.
Right. Yeah. Another thing that's important to note is a lot of the SOEs in China, they're almost like industries to some degree, but they are often self-regulated, you could say, to create internal competition, essentially having a number of different subsidiaries inside them that are competing with one another to increase the efficiency. So all I'm saying is that compared to what many people are thinking when they hear the word SOE, and they're used to SOEs in other countries around the world, many of these creatures here are a lot more efficient and a lot closer to a private enterprise than what you would find in many other places.
What do you think of the decrease in the reserve ratio requirement and reduction of liquidity? Will the release of up to 800 billion RMB find its way to the real estate market? No, this time around it won't be the viable option on the table, unlike what we had in the year 2008. But what will happen to the liquidity?
Well, that's a classic monetary policy to stimulate the economy, and I think that will provide more credit on the market and will provide easy access to companies. Especially, I think, as our Premier, Mr. Li Keqiang, has emphasized repeatedly, that this credit is supposed to go towards those small and medium-sized businesses. They really need credit. That's the workhorse.
Are you sure that much of the liquidity will find its way to the SME?
Well, I hope so. I hope so.
You hope so. You keep your fingers crossed. We kept that for 8 years,
well, I mean,
10 years.
Maybe this time is different. Maybe I mean, look at the measures they've introduced, trying.
But what about the credibility of the SME? I mean, that's a core issue concerning the trust. Trust is so important for the loans, right?
I think, well, I mean, for the SMEs, the problem is the transaction costs. The banks really don't like to lend money to small and medium-sized business because they're not as profitable as lending to big companies. So the central government said, look, it's okay, so we're going to give you some subsidies so as to cover some of these costs. That's what Mr. Li is saying.
And Carl, what do you think of tax breaks for SME as well as we were discussing loans, but what about tax breaks?
I'm actually in favor of that. I think there's a need in China to provide additional stimulus for SMEs for reasons we've just heard.
Well, what about the focus of concerns for quite a few years, John and Carl? The more tax breaks the central government unleashes, the more heavier the drag looks on the back of SMEs. I mean, people have been complaining about this bitterly. The more tax breaks, the more heavier the burden could be for the SME. Why? Why?
I think it's, I mean, the devil's on the details in the devils, I guess. The devil's in the details. It's respect to implementation of these tax reliefs. And I hope this time is different. Our tax burden is too high. I mean, that's a problem. Our national economy cannot be competitive with such a high level of tax burden. And across the board, I think we should provide tax relief. And our government has to be smaller, leaner, and more efficient.
Then what do we think of the debt of the Chinese government compared with the United States, France, Britain, and other major economies?
It's low. The percentage,
but it is
percentage of the GDP is very moderate, put it this way. I think Wikipedia has a web page that lists all the countries in the world in terms of their national debt levels, a percentage of GDP. China is way below on that list. Way below on that list. The highest one is Japan, as we all know. So I think in terms of the country's capability to carry out some more national debt, I think we're okay. I think I'm all for fiscal stimulus for projects, for infrastructures that can create jobs in the short run, but also serving as an enabling infrastructure for more growth in the future.
I think the devil in the details is an important thing, and I think that the policy is quite okay. I think that the bigger problem sometimes in the past has been implementation. And I think we want to be sure that the implementation is consistent, and if that's done...
But what do you mean by execution of the policies? Are you actually referring to the low morale and inaction of local government officials amidst the backdrop of high-handed anti-graft campaign? John, you know better the political scenario.
Absolutely. Some of the things you have said is absolutely true. I think that they need to do that. They have to clean up house and be as lawful as they enforce the law. So I think these are aspects of waiting for improvement. But overall, I think put it this way: our National Tax Bureau is huge, because I know that they have about 750,000 of employees. If you look at the number of employees, number of people for collecting every, say, $100 of taxes, okay, our ratio is actually pretty high. That means there's room for efficiency improvement. There's room for
given the huge external pressure on overseas investment in the high-tech area in China, what do you think of the sustainability of China's digital technology? For example, 5G, and in this area, Huawei assumes real leadership, not only in China, but for the rest of the world. Do you think this is a major part of the driving force that may sustain our economy?
I think it's an important point. I think that China still has more growth potential in this area, but Huawei indeed is an interesting case. Huawei is not only doing their own R&D, they've really played an important role in setting the 5G standard and so forth, and that's really encouraging. I mean, from a point of view of looking at the development of the Chinese economy to see this happen. I think that sometimes a company can learn something positive. I often say when I talk about what makes a successful leader is someone who can see the positive things in a negative event. And Huawei's bout with Cisco quite some years back, I think taught them an important lesson, which is that it's really important to seriously invest in R&D, I mean doing your own R&D and inventing your own things. And I hope that other Chinese companies can learn as positively from negative events like Huawei has.
But what do you think of the outcome of tax breaks in the United States in their relationship with the stock market? Do you think much of the money found its way to the stock market to monetize? I mean,
the China stock market, I don't know if it can even go lower. I mean, it's already been so low for such a long time.
Maybe we expect a rebound as it touched the...
Well, today's performance is actually pretty good. With the news announced that the market didn't tank, it's reasonably okay. So I think there's a lot of investment opportunities actually going forward in the stock market here in China. It's already low. It's been low for so long that I think it's forming a base, and we're looking for some good time ahead.
Carl, I give you 1 minute to talk about your therapy solutions to the downward economic pressure in China in the year 2019.
So one thing is definitely to make sure that small and medium-sized enterprises continue to be supported. A second thing is continual growth of the service sector. I think that's really important to have happen.
For example, education, Medicare, pensioners' life?
Yeah, I think that Medicare is healthcare is a sector in China, especially healthcare for the aging, that has really high potential for growth. It's probably not the area that China is the best developed in, and I think there are a lot of really good opportunities for companies there.
What about the sizable army of the middle class? They are the bulk of the consumers in something which is close to the market economy in China. We cannot call it the market economy in the Western sense. Your solution, please.
My solution is that we should continue to invest in those what's called new emerging technologies or new emerging industrial sectors for things like, as reported in today's release, in things like new energy cars, robotics, what's called microwave terminals, new fiber technologies, all these new things. And I think these are the future. And look at the statistics. They have been growing quite robust. I mean, look, we're talking about even close to 100% growth rate. And there's a lot of VC money poured into these fields. And I wish them all success and create more jobs and also upgrade our industry.
Very quickly, Carl, what do you think of a comparison between the dragon and elephant, India? Do you think India is likely to catch up very quickly?
In some of the lower value-added areas, they're going to be gaining some steam. But I actually think the reforms that China is making long-term is going to help China long-term to be competitive. What I'm most concerned for China is the sort of short-term of the next year or two.
We are getting old, given the perhaps the negative growth of the population in some quarters of the Chinese society. With that, we come to the end of this very interesting brainstorming with Carl and John. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.